All right, let's dive into the Lang ecosystem. If you've heard the names LangChain, LangGraph, and LangSmith thrown around, and it all feels a bit jumbled, don't worry. We're about to make it all make sense.
So if you've ever felt like you're trying to find your way through a dense jungle of new AI terms, well, you're not alone, and you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're drawing a nice, clear map to guide you through it all.
Okay, so to really get this, we have to start with the most fundamental problem that large language models, or LLMs, have right out of the box. It's a challenge that pretty much every developer hits the second they try to use an LLM for their own business.
You see, a standard LLM like GPT knows a ton about the public internet. So sure, it can tell you who the first person on the moon was, no problem. But what happens when you ask it something specific to your company? Like, hey, what's our t-shirt refund policy? Crickets. It has no idea, because it's never seen your private company documents.
So, how do we fix that? Well, we use this really powerful technique called Retrieval Augmented Generation, or just RAG. Now I know, it sounds super technical, right? But the idea is actually pretty simple. We just give the LLM the specific documents it needs, like our company's policy files, to find the right answer. We're literally augmenting its knowledge on the fly.
Okay, so that's the what we need to do. But how do you actually build a chatbot that uses RAG? And that very question brings us to our first tool in the ecosystem, LangChain. Building a RAG pipeline is kind of like following a recipe. There's a clear, step-by-step process. You load up your documents, you split them into smaller chunks, you store them in a special database so you can search them easily, and then you pull out the right info to answer a question. Now, you could code all this from scratch, but LangChain gives you all these ready-made components to build this chain of tasks way, way easier.
And that's the key thing to remember about LangChain. It is perfect for building what we call workflows. These are apps where the LLM is basically just one piece of a straightforward, predictable assembly line. It's not thinking for itself, it's just doing a specific job you told it to do.
But here's the thing. These simple linear paths, they have their limits. What happens when what the user needs is way more complicated than just a single question and a single answer? This is where things start to get really interesting.
I mean, really think about it. What if the user's request isn't a simple query? What if it's a multi-step process that needs some back and forth, that needs to remember things, and even needs to use different tools to get the job done?
Just take a look at this request from a customer. This isn't a one-shot answer, is it? Nope. This is the beginning of a conversation, a whole task that needs to be managed from start to finish, with a bunch of steps along the way. And to handle this, our app needs to do a whole bunch of things. It has to look up the policy, then query a database for the order info, then call an external API to check inventory, and maybe even talk to some software to print a shipping label. A simple, one-way street just isn't going to cut it here.
This is exactly the point where a simple workflow breaks down. It's where LangChain kind of hits its limit, and it's why we need a much more powerful framework. This is the problem that LangGraph was built to solve.
See, LangGraph is all about building agentic applications. And you can think of an agent like a really smart assistant. It doesn't just follow a script. It can plan, it can break a big task into smaller pieces, use different tools when it needs to, and even go back and retry a step if it fails. It can work through a problem just like a person would. So, instead of that simple, straight-line chain, LangGraph thinks in terms of a graph. Imagine a flowchart with loops and branches. This structure is what gives the agent its power. It allows the LLM to actually make decisions, to say, okay, that tool didn't work, I'm going to loop back and try this other one instead. It can actually choose its own path.
So let's just break it down, side by side. LangChain is your go-to for building those linear reactive chains. You give it an input, it gives you an output. Simple. LangGraph, on the other hand, is the framework for orchestrating complex, stateful agents, systems that remember what's happened and can make their own choices to get a job done.
Okay, so you did it. You picked your tool, LangChain for a simple workflow, or LangGraph for a complex agent, and you built this amazing application. You deploy it to production, time to celebrate, right? Well, not so fast. A whole new set of challenges just walked in the door.
Once your app is out there in the real world, talking to real users, how in the world do you know what's actually going on under the hood? I mean, what happens when it messes up? How do you figure out why?
All of a sudden, you've got these really important questions, right? How do I debug this thing when it fails? How much money am I spending on API calls and tokens?
Is the agent even any good at its job? You absolutely need answers to these questions.
And that is precisely the problem that LangSmith solves. It's not a library for building things, it's the dedicated platform for watching over everything you've already built. Think of it as the mission control center for your entire LLM-powered system.
With LangSmith, you get this incredibly detailed trace of every single run. You can see every single step your agent took. For example, you can see right here that a call to the database was super fast, but whoa, that call to ChatGPT took over a second and burned through 390 tokens. Finding a bug or a bottleneck suddenly becomes, well, actually possible.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. We've looked at all three of the big pieces. Now let's put them all together and see that complete, unified picture of the Lang ecosystem.
Here's probably the simplest way to think about it. LangChain and LangGraph, those are your open source tools. They're what you build with. LangChain for the simple stuff, LangGraph for the complex agent stuff. And LangSmith, that's the control panel. That's the commercial platform you use to run, debug, and monitor everything you built in production.
So there you have it. We started out maybe a little lost in the Lang jungle, but now we have a map. We know the tools for building and the platform for watching over them. So the only real question left is, now that you know the way, what are you going to build?